We are now 4 rounds into the Simusell simulation, and I believe that's a good moment to do some initial reflections. 4 quarters equals a full year, so yeah, makes sense to start evaluating as in how are things going relative to what you expected. And let's start with just looking top line, as in revenue and profit. So you know that the way I'm going to evaluate this, and the way any business owner would evaluate the success of his or her business, is looking by the cumulative profit. How much profit is this venture generating for me? And but early on there may be other measures as well, as in maybe revenue matters. Now what you see is that revenue and profit line up for most, but not for all teams. And that's somewhat expected given that you compete with very similar competitors. So yeah, you would expect, all else being equal, that revenue and profits kind of match. But what is it telling you? That 2 teams are clearly leading in cumulative profitability, and they're not the 2 teams that are clearly leading in market share. So what's happening there? Another thing that you can see from this is the beginnings of a seasonality pattern. And interestingly, it doesn't exactly match the seasonality pattern in your book, or in the manual, I should say. Why is that? And so something to think about. Has it anything to do with... Actually, let me not give you hints. Why does it not match the seasonality pattern exactly? And how does that impact your expectations for next quarter? So that's something to keep in mind. And final thing here, although the sales in Q4 were lower, and that's to be expected because it is still following, at least beginning to follow some seasonality pattern, you see that a number of teams have managed to stabilize their profit. In fact, a number of teams have actually managed to grow their profit despite their sales declining. And that's, I think, a really good sign where those 2 teams are. What's happening with the other teams? What's driving your increase or decrease in profitability? So all things to think about just from looking at 2 very simple graphs. Another crucial graph here, your market share. So most of the times market share is a real strong predictor for company success. And not always. Sometimes you're buying market share. Sometimes there's underlying issues that you cannot fix with market share alone. But having a tiny market share is probably not going to be very conducive to you being the most profitable player in the market. So those are things to keep in mind. Another question here is what's your fair share? So what is a fair share? So something to look up if you don't know it. And what should it be? Simulation is having some hints there, as in don't shy away from Googling it. But your next question there should be, why are you doing better or worse than that? And how about the industry pattern that you see here? Is that realistic? Do we see industries out there? And yeah, so again, I'll phrase it as a question, but I want you guys to answer it for yourself, or at least in your group. Does this make sense? Are there often industries with multiple players? Of course, monopolies is a different story, but when there are multiple players involved, does this make sense where 1 or 2 are dominating, and then you have a little bit of a middle of a pack maybe, and then you have a large group of much smaller players? And what's the consequence for those players, as in how should they manage their sales force, and how should the leading companies manage their sales force? Now here's some info that's harder to get from the game. It's in there, and you can pay for it. But let me show you some information to make sure that we all know what's going on here. 9 teams. Very wide range of decisions so far. So some teams are focusing on a relatively small number of states. Some teams are focusing on a relatively large number of states. And they're covering them with widely different numbers of salespeople. So if you look at the numbers, as in 5 states is the minimum, 34 is the maximum so far. So that's a 6-fold difference. The range is pretty large there. If we look at sales reps, 15 is the maximum, 4 sales reps is the minimum. So that's almost a 4-time range there. So you guys are using very widely different strategies to cover this market. Not surprisingly, you see that there's some clustering in a number of these markets. So California, Texas, Florida, heavily sought after. So well competed for. And you also see a historical pattern. Guess which states are the most heavily covered? The states you started off with. I like that, because that's how things would go in the real world. As in, if you start off in a state, and Michigan may not be the best state for solar panels for all these reasons, but very few companies would give up on that. So that's, I think this is an interesting chart. No one is selling in Alaska. I think that makes sense. The solar panel sales in Alaska are, you can look it up, but they're really poor, and for all the right reasons, of course. Oil is cheap there, and sun is kind of scarce. So why on earth would you spend money on solar panels there? Are there some panels being sold there? Yes, but it's probably not worth any of your attention. So I think most of you caught on to that. But there's other opportunities here still. If we look at the relative dominance in a state, we see a slightly different picture. As in, different teams are dominating different states, and some teams are dominating states much more clearly than others. There's let me share one secret with you. There's one team in my childish Batman ideas. I called it Dark Knight. That's actually none of you. That's me. That's me doing nothing. So there's one team in there that's not making any decisions. They should not be beating you because they're not making decisions. And but Team Dark Knight is dominant in 3 states by not doing anything. So that's an interesting interesting observation, I would say. So what is it? Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. So something happened there, as in you guys, maybe on purpose, went away from there. So I was just making this argument as in, hey, look at this historical pattern, but it may not. You guys did make changes for sure, and by and large, you didn't make changes for the better in those states, because by doing nothing, you would have scored a higher percentage of sales there. Now, all the other states, very different stories. We see that even the leading team is not dominating in all the states. So they're dominating in very important states, but still. And other teams that are somewhere more in the middle are also dominating in particular states. So again, figure out what's going on here. Highest performers do dominate the most attractive regions, but the question is here, is that cause or is that effect? So are they the highest performers because they dominate those states, or does dominating those states make you the highest performer? I hope I said that well, but you know what I mean. So here's your job, and because I want to do some reflection. We can continue the same way and keep pressing buttons, but that's one thing. But answer some questions for me in a one-pager. I'm not looking for lengthy essays. So first question, did you explicitly formulate a strategy, and if so, what was it? If not, see question number 5. Second question, how do you stack up against your strategy? If you didn't do anything, then if you didn't formulate a strategy, answer to me is in against your expectations. So I'm not letting you get off with giving me less insights. it will be slightly different. Now, third question is really, really important. What is your current major problem or problems? And feel free to list the symptoms, but as we discussed, as in also focus on the cause. So symptoms are one thing, as in my profit is poor or my market share is too low. Yeah, that's a symptom. I know that. We can all see that. What's the cause of that? Why? What's different here? And some things are per definition not possible. As in, you can't say my problem is we don't have a good enough product. Everyone is having the same product. So that's that's not it. But what else is going on here? We can't find any good salespeople. The same salespeople were available to everybody. So why didn't you get them? Now, regardless whether something is a key issue or not for you, what's the quality of your forecasts? And I've sent some messages to a couple of teams in the past. Some of you are doing really, really well here. Others are still struggling. If you are struggling, why? There's information in the simulation. It's important. It's definitely important for this, as a path to improving your profitability. In real life, forecasting is crucial as well. You will lose your job if you promise your boss that you're going to sell 2 million and you end up selling 200,000. You will tick off people. You probably won't lose your job if you say you're going to sell 2 million and then you sell 4. And my guess is they'll still keep you employed, but my guess is also, and I'm almost certain about that you leave money on the table because all of a sudden they have to rush in orders, scramble to get by because you under forecasted by 2 million. And so it's not good. It's not as bad as over forecasting, but still. Second question there is, what's the quality of your territory structure? Does this make sense? What are you doing? Does it make sense relatively, and relatively to the other teams? And if you cannot answer these questions, which is perhaps legit, how will you find out? Because these are things that you should be able to answer. I recognize that you may not be able to answer it, but what do we do to fix that? So and then finally formulate an updated strategy. So 5 fairly straightforward questions. I think the questions themselves are not the problem. Figuring out a concise answer to them may be more challenging. Now let's speak a little bit about the conciseness there. So it's a one-page improvement plan that I want to see. And I'm very strict about that one page. In business, people are not looking forward to reading 7-page essays. In fact, whenever I see a large blurb of text, double-spaced with lots of, just a large blurb of text, people don't like reading it. Will I read it? Yes, you pay me, so I will read it. Your boss or other people in your firm may not read it and may therefore ignore what you're saying. So don't give me that. Give me a one-page improvement plan, business-like format, so feel free to use bullet points, headings. Definitely not an essay. I'm pretty allergic to essays. And just tell me what I need to know and make sure that I can read it very, very fast. Assume that I have a minute to read your paper or improvement plan. I will spend more time on it, but write it as if I have a minute and my eye needs to be drawn to the major conclusion immediately. There's a Dropbox on Brightspace where you post it, now, like I said, by next Tuesday. Then there's a tiny little bonus, so definitely not mandatory, but appreciate it. Tell me, second page, any format goes, but again, only one page. What's the best part of the game? What's the worst part of the game? What do you dislike the most? And that's either the game or how we run it or whatever. My personal promise is feel free to say whatever you want, not holding it against you. What should I improve? And again, feel more than free to think outside the box. And finally, what features would you add or what information is missing? So that would be the secondary part. Doesn't have to match up. Feel free to send that to me later if you want to think about it longer. But I would appreciate it.